This is the Fitness Wisdom Podcast.
Hello and welcome back to another exciting episode of the Fitness Wisdom Podcast. Today we have a very exciting guest, Jack Schroder. He's a health coach and also a nutritionist, and we're going to be covering some of the most interesting topics today, which I am very passionate about, and so is Jack. And we're going to be covering topics such as melanin, water, voltage, charge, DHA, all of the stuff that the audience loves of the show. But before we get into all of that, as well as hormones, I would love to hear your story, Jack, how you actually got into the world of circadian and quantum biology. What was the trigger that brought you down this path?
Yeah, no worries. So, prior to this recording, we were talking about how I'm living in the Philippines, living a bit of a decentralized life. So let's reverse engineer that. So probably about 3 to 4 years ago, I got a bit curious in the health space around the time where the pandemic was happening. So, of course, there was a lot going on at that stage. And yeah, for me, it was like a lot tied to like hormones, dopamine, gut issues, anxiety, depression, addiction. A lot of things were going on in my life. And I went and saw like an endocrinologist. I did a bunch of blood work and it was not finding any answers whatsoever. Like it made me really question the system at that stage. And I was probably, I think I was like, I knew about like blue light blocking glasses and all this kind of stuff. And like, I was always had this like connection to like nature provides the answers, but I just never found it because of course it's absolutely buried in the centralized system. You don't see it anywhere. And that's reflective of like what a hospital environment looks like or a doctor's office where it's just like the exact opposite of nature. And yeah, I got my testosterone. So when I was at rock bottom, essentially, I was addicted to drugs to a degree. I suppose it was like normalized. My testosterone was very low. Like I'm talking below the reference range, which is already like a pretty broad and generous reference range.
Yes.
And yeah, just was not feeling good. Flash forward a bit, like trial and error with like carnivore diet, keto diet, all this kind of shit. And then I think I just came across like a book by Sachin Panda, if you know who that is. And I think it's called The Circadian Code. And that really interested me because it was very much about like light, dark cycles, circadian biology, but obviously on like the very much the surface level, just touched on basically feeding times as opposed to light. And that definitely stimulated a few neurons in me. And then after that, I'm not sure who I came across, but yeah, it just started to incorporate things such as like light environment on top of just like eating seasonally. And then a few supplements here and there. And honestly, just like trying to make big changes in my life. It wasn't just like the circadian stuff per se. It was a lot of emotional stuff that I was working through. I spoke to like a really good therapist and I stopped drugs and alcohol. I just gave it up. I was like, this is it. I had an incident where I like broke my arm and like I was running away from the police. That's a whole other story. That was during COVID, where I was staying at like a party that I wasn't meant to be at because of the restrictions. But yeah, it kind of essentially driven me to a place where I got to a standard of like my testosterone being above the reference range. Something else to note, I did have like sleep apnea as well, which didn't really get rectified either. It was like kind of like a mouth guard. So just a lot of things, as you know, like with chronic illness or chronic unwellness, you do have like many things at play. But essentially, I got to a stage where I'm like, wow, I actually feel pretty good here. My testosterone was high. I just had this new purpose, I think, and I wanted to help people in a similar position to me, or just people who are struggling and they just needed that guidance. And I think now more than ever, that's what we need because there's just so much information out there. Like it's just very conflicting online where you see 10 different opinions in the space of 1 minute of scrolling. So I think like the guidance aspect is also huge. Yeah, my old job, I was an electrical linesman, so I worked on power lines, which I never thought would have served me in the health space. But I think like knowing what we know around like electricity in the body and energy and light, it actually became quite useful in the end. So I'm very grateful for that. But I quit my job 2 years ago, and then I literally just tried to start up a business. And of course, like the first year was a bit challenging, and now I'm about 2.5 years into it. And yeah, health coach / nutritionist, work with clients one-to-one. Got a school community that people can also dive into. And I just love reading research and posting things online about not only like my life and stuff, but just insights in terms of how can I make people better and essentially decentralize them from a system that isn't really tied to prevention of health issues, but just treatment.
Thank you for sharing your personal journey. Is very inspiring for sure. And because anybody who can overcome addiction and come out through the other side and become a better version of themselves is a massive success for sure, because it's definitely not easy, because this is wired within our system. Once we are addicted to something, it's very hard to break the loop, because it's happening on a physiological level, and therefore it's impacting our mental state and our emotional state, right, as well, because we tend to think of our head or our brain separate from the rest of the body, but so much that's happening to our physiology is impacting the way that we respond to reality, and the way that our neurotransmitters work as well reinforce certain states. And I guess that's on purpose, so that we are designed to be addicted to nature, but modern living allows us to hijack this system and makes us addicted to the wrong type of things. And I guess you could even say that this has been engineered on purpose to divorce us from nature and to actually make us sick and, unwell, so that they can actually profit from us. But you mentioned like a couple of things there about your hormones. What do you think initially was the thing that actually tanked your hormones in the first place? Like, what was the biggest contributors, do you believe? And then you talked about all of the other things that you did, all of the good stuff to come out of it on the other side successfully. So maybe let's dive into all of the culprits that actually took you down the dark path.
If there was one substance that could increase your energy levels, optimize mitochondrial function, boost ATP production, help to optimize your hormones, remineralize the body with ionic minerals, boost cognitive function, assist detoxification, and support your gut health via the microbiome, this substance is Shilajit, known as the destroyer of weakness. Shilajit is a herbomineral substance made from the decomposition of plants and bacteria, this process taking place over thousands of years. It is harvested from high altitude locations, primarily the Altai and Himalayan mountains. And what makes Shilajit so unique is that it's made by Mother Nature herself. I call it nature's methylene blue. Not all Shilajit that you find on the market is created equally. This is why I only use and trust Mountain Drop Shilajit. They have an extremely high quality Shilajit product that has been rigorously tested for heavy metals and impurities. Grab yourself some Shilajit, the destroyer of weakness, today, and head over to mountaindrop.com. Use the promo code MobilityFitness at checkout for a nice discount as well.
Yeah, so I think it was a number of things. I just had absolutely no clue. Like, I would go to the gym and I would try and get my 150 grams of protein or whatever it was, and that's all that mattered. It didn't matter if it was KFC or McDonald's. It was like, as long as I hit that amount of protein, I was happy. So I think processed food's obviously a no-brainer. I think like it's probably going to get repetitive in terms of what I say, but yeah, like light environment, addicted to technology, emotional suppression, drugs and alcohol use. I think like they're probably the huge contributors. And then on top of that, I think the straw that broke the camel's back would have 100% been like the pandemic and just the stress and social isolation within itself. Because, I mean, that's huge. Like, and we could get into like the cogs and gears of what that sort of encompasses on a biochemical and biophysical level. But yeah, like I would say they would be the biggest drivers, and they all just synergize together. And of course, like when you have, for example, like one root cause, it's never really just one root cause. And I think like, the nuance around it is like, for example, if you have like emotional suppression or nervous system dysregulation, like of course, like that's going to innervate the rest of the body. So it's not just like this one root cause you have to deal with. Like you've got physical symptoms at play now. And that's exactly what happened with like my gut issues. Like I definitely would have had some sort of bacterial SIBO sort of vibe to it, based off just like looking at my old blood work from 3 to 4 years ago. So yeah, I think just many things happening at once, and being at that age of like young age of like 18, 19, 20, you almost think you're invincible, and then all of a sudden about 24, 25, I'm 30 now. It just it all just comes crashing at once. You just start pushing shit uphill essentially, and like it just comes out of nowhere, and you're like, wow, like I thought I could just do this for the rest of my life, but of course, like you hit a wall.
Yeah. Oh my God. Yeah, it's so important to be aware about all of these things, and that you actually bring it to people's awareness. And you said there about being repetitive, about repeating about the light and stuff. But I think it's so important to reinforce that and to remind people all the time, because of course there are many people who are first-time listeners to the show as well. They have no idea that light can actually influence any single part of your body, really. They just think that light equals brightness, or, light equals, just something that you can see, but they don't actually realize that it's affecting your biology on a very deep and fundamental level. So let's talk a little bit about the hormones then, in general. Like, how do you see hormones like from a quantum perspective? Because I've heard people before say that hormones are carriers of light. Do you want to give your own description on that?
So I suppose what you have to look at, right? And it's not just limited to hormones, also like neurotransmitters as well. Like if we dissect that, so all steroid hormones are made from cholesterol. Cholesterol has got like a 4 hydrocarbon ring, and it interacts with light. We know that because cholesterol down the line will form vitamin D through 7-dehydrocholesterol. Mm-hmm. And then another thing, of course, is with the aromatic amino acids. So tryptophan, tyrosine, phenylalanine, and histidine, they all form some pretty crucial neurotransmitters as well as hormones. So you've got thyroid hormone and adrenaline as an example. Then you've got noradrenaline, dopamine, serotonin, melatonin. Like all of these things, like is it just a coincidence that they all happen? Like 90% of our hormones are connected to light. Like, and obviously the answer is when you dig a bit deeper in terms of looking at like the absorption and emission spectra of these molecules, that the answer is there is a deep connection with light here. And I think around hormones, so of course, like we got steroid hormones, so that's going to encompass testosterone, DHT, estradiol, progesterone, DHEA, cortisol, so on and so forth. But yeah, you just got to think like, what are hormones really? They are essentially it's information to determine what's going on in your external environment and as well as your internal environment. So we're talking not just like light and dark cycles here, but also temperature, also just what you eat. And then on top of that, of course, you got your internal environment, which also dictates what's going on with light in the form of biophoton emissions, which I would love to get into.
Yes.
And of course, like your emotional state will also dictate that. Breathing, like all these things will essentially dictate what's going to happen on that biophysical level to what hormones are essentially made. And I suppose like if we just go to the surface level in terms of what that encompasses from like external light, is that of course you've got like light in this, like in terms of sunlight and artificial light. And if you look at a rainbow, of course there's like 7 different colors, I believe, and then you got ultraviolet and infrared. And this light interacts with our skin through various photoreceptors or chromophores, which interact with light, our eyes, even our gut. And this light is essentially information. So it's like, okay, what should we do right now with the light that's hitting us? And of course, like by design, blue light, if you search it, like just search any emission spectra of like an iPhone or a computer screen, you're going to see these really sharp blue light peaks. And that happens to be the same spectrum for 60 to 480 as what suppresses melatonin, regulates the hypothalamus. So again, like you have these eyes inputs of light going down the retino-hypothalamic tract into the hypothalamus, which again coordinates with the frontal lobes, speaks to the brainstem, speaks to the pituitary gland, which again releases those hormones that act directly on the steroidogenic tissue. So like, for example, the testes. And all of it is just like this orchestra of light signals. So when, for example, like just for melatonin, it's like the domino effect in terms of what it can do. So when you have sufficient melatonin from darkness and sunlight during the day and then darkness at night, you're going to get that conversion from serotonin to melatonin. Melatonin will then act in the hypothalamus to allow for leptin to bind to its receptor. And then you've got like things like prolactin, growth hormone, and then eventually down the line, you'll have cortisol again. And then it sort of repeats in the morning where you need that light stimulation of blue. So when we go back to just like what artificial light is, it's these sharp blue peaks that not only suppress melatonin, but raise cortisol. So again, you've got these 2 master hormones that are on a seesaw essentially in terms of determining what's going to happen downstream with these other hormones. And of course, blue light at night, blue light throughout the day without UV and infrared, because we just mentioned that UV interacts with cholesterol and aromatic amino acids to build up all those neurotransmitters. We haven't even spoken about the infrared, but of course that's going to influence mitochondria, water, mitochondrial melatonin, collagen production, which again, it happens to be just all like semiconductors that are absolutely fundamental for our system running correctly. But anyway, hormones are essentially, they're going to get cleaved or they're going to get made determining by the information it receives. And it's not just light. Light is playing a big role. Well, it is just light, but if we look at it from like the external standpoint, but it is biophotons. Down the line, it is these biophotons, extremely ultra weak biophoton emissions, that are governing the release and coordination of anything found in your cells, in your organs, in your tissues, and in the whole body. It's essentially like this electromagnetic information. Kind of think of it like, I suppose, 1 million routers going off at once, sending information, you know? So yeah, it gets pretty complex in terms of that. And it's just like, well, with cholesterol and its light absorption and emission spectra, you can almost bet that there's going to be all these interactions down the line with these other hormones and neurotransmitters. It's just not a coincidence.
Wow, that was absolutely mind-blowing. And thank you for sharing that. That was such a great breakdown. So you mentioned then there are a couple of things like the light that we're exposed to, the temperature, the timing of the food that we like, our internal environment, such as our gut health, and also these biophotons. And am I missing something else? These major things are influencing our hormone health in general, right? And they are impacting us on such a deep level that we don't actually understand. It sounds so complicated when you talk about it, because it actually is. But at the same time, it's also super simple. Our connection with nature.
Complex.
Yeah, beautifully complex. It's like, it's just this orchestra that is occurring under the hood. We don't need to know about it. We just need to reconnect with our natural environment. And just by simply being outdoors, right, all of these things are automatically occurring. So without us humans interfering with the environment that we're originally supposed to exist in, like all of these processes that you just mentioned are occurring, you know, automatically as a byproduct of just living in alignment with nature. Whereas when we divorce ourselves from the natural environment and we come to an indoor environment, now because of the misalignment with the light and dark cycles, the change in the eating times, the type of food that we eat, even the change in the temperature, for example, using air conditioning indoors and, you know, shutting the windows and all of that, that is changing our internal environment and therefore our hormone production. And we know that our hormones influence so much in our body, right? Our mood and our appetite and literally our our libido, anything. Basically, it impacts every single aspect of our biology, right?
100%. Like neurotransmitters and hormones. I mean, well, when you think about it, right, they're going to be the product of signaling on that biochemical level. But again, it's like if we dig a bit deeper, there's something deeper going on in terms of like these light absorption and emission spectras, not just biophotons, but also like the electrical currents, proton tunneling, solitons. So like literally the conjugation of like energy that forms this like vibrational wave of like all different frequencies essentially to communicate through water networks. So I think it's just like, yeah, hormones. I mean, like you can look at someone's hormone panel and you'll be able to make a pretty decent assumption in terms of how they're feeling, you know, stack blood work on top, even more so. But again, it's just like, yeah, they do run so many things in the body on that biochemical level. But I think the most interesting part is like what is going on that biophysical level with these light emissions, like the biophoton emissions. And it didn't really interest me that much, to be honest, when I first started learning about it. I mean, of course, like the circadian stuff, it's just like, just get the fuck outside, block light at night, just be dark, get as much get as much outside time as you can, and then just get darkness at night, you know? And it's like, okay, that's it. Moving on. So what's the next thing? And then like after I dug into Roland Van Wyck's work, he said something that really grabbed my attention, and it was about, as we know that like biophotons are products of oxygen metabolism. And of course, oxygen is connected to inflammation, free radicals, things of that nature. But what really intrigued me about one of the articles he had, and I can't even remember the name or when it was released, was that there's certain patterns from these biophotons that may come out. Of course, we've got like a range of like 200 nanometers all the way up until about 1500 nanometers of this light being emitted. And I was thinking, like when I read it and I saw this part and it said, we will be able to determine disease before symptoms occur once we're able to determine the light patterns found inside the cell. And I was like, okay, now we're really cooking, you know, because like that's huge. Like if you're able to figure out Parkinson's disease or dementia or gut dysbiosis, like fungal overgrowth or whatever it is, if you can find that before symptoms, then it's like, oh, okay, that makes sense. Like this is why they're potentially not researching this whatsoever, because it's too fucking good.
Yeah, so basically it would be really cool if they had some kind of biophoton scanner that you could actually see, you know, in people's bodies, like their biophoton emission in specific tissues of the body, you know, where they may be presenting some symptoms already, or in just in general, like a general health scan, to see people's health status just from the type of, the spectrum of the biophotons. So I can assume that the spectrum and the intensity and all of that must be different in different tissues. It's not like all the same, right? Because different tissues must have different timing and, the way that they work. Would that be accurate?
Yeah, and I think like what's beautiful about AI right now is that like if we were able to have this photo multiply inside living cells in certain tissues, and it would present like a number of different wavelengths at certain times, however it's sort of done, and you plug that into AI, like a certain system that can process that, and then it can be like, okay, this is the light patterns for Parkinson's disease, or this is the light patterns for OCD, whatever it is. And it's like, yeah, I think, of course, what's reflective of biophoton emissions is, of course, like the mitochondrial density found in the tissue. So, for example, of course, like the brain and heart have the highest amount of electromagnetic pulsing. But then, of course, we've got like the muscles as well, which is very mitochondrial dense. It's found right next to so you've got the muscle fiber, but then you've got connective tissue surrounding it. And we know that collagen is a semiconductor that shuttles energy and information throughout the system. So I think like, again, it's like optimizing all of these, but yeah, it comes down to how we handle oxygen at cytochrome C oxidase, complex 4. That is literally the be all or end all in terms of the disease that we see, essentially, because what fundamentally happens is what governs ATP, biophoton emissions, metabolic water, and then free radical pulses. And of course, like the mitochondria has this DNA that will communicate through the water networks, through microtubules, through the nuclear DNA. So there's so many things going on with that. And of course, like every tissue is going to be very different in terms of the light that it will emit. And unfortunately, like we can't actually see this light, and it's very hard to measure. But again, I think this is like where at the root of what is fundamentally controlling our biology for greater or worse.
Light influences every single system of your body, from mood, skin health, cognition, energy levels, gut health, sexual function, training performance, recovery, wound healing, body composition, and so much more. This is why I make sure to block the harmful artificial blue light and expose myself to the beneficial wavelengths of light to optimize my biology. Upgrade your biology today by upgrading your light environment. Head over to emrtech.com/mobilityfitness and use the promo code mobilityfitness for a massive 20% discount at checkout for the best red light therapy panels on the market and the best blue light blocking glasses.
So then my question would be, how do we determine how the mitochondria handle the oxygen then? Is there some key determinants or lifestyle factors that we can assume that the body doesn't handle oxygen well, or it makes the mitochondria not be able to handle the oxygen and therefore cause this damage?
So like with oxygen, as I said, like it reacts with protons and electrons at cytochrome C oxidase in every single mitochondria we have, which is quadrillions, right? I mean, like for example, a heart cell, cardiomyocyte has like 7,000 mitochondria, and this is happening every second at every cristae, at every single electron transport chain. And what we have to know is that how well we use oxygen is directly tied to how well we recycle protons, how well we tunnel electrons, and again, making those substrates at the end of it, light emissions, free radicals, water, ATP, which of course have their own effects down the line in terms of enhancing us from like a quantum standpoint. And the way we handle oxygen, of course, like there's hemoglobin. So red blood cells carry hemoglobin, and they can be in the +2 or +3 state. And under hypoxic conditions, that can shift. And what can drive hypoxia? I mean, like, this is the thing. Stress is what drives hypoxia. Just all kinds of stress. It could be fucking light stress, metabolic, environmental. All of it goes down the same pathway to essentially trigger hypoxia. So then we make less oxygen. And what that is essentially, like, of course, in the right amounts, like, for example, exercise, it's a hormetic effect. So it's going to be beneficial. But of course, like, we're not fucking next to Wi-Fi for 5 minutes and getting this hormetic effect. We're using it chronically, we're exposed to environmental toxins, we're working out in blue light gyms. So again, it's like the hormetic pulse that we're getting is far too much. But what essentially happens is that any sort of stress will lead to hypoxia through HIF-1 alpha, and that shifts mitochondrial metabolism big time. It shifts the whole cell basically. And then on top of that, you got things such as like fear, which kind of ties in with stress and like the cell danger response. And what fundamentally happens is, this is what I think, just like using my electrical background, is that I think the body is like, okay, so we're meant to have like this Ferrari engine in our body, right? But when we can't use the fuel properly, which is oxygen, protons, and electrons, we have to downgrade the system. So when you see that, you've got to think like we dehydrate ourselves. We prevent collagen production because of blue light, as an example, or just stress in general. We degrade melanin. What else do we do? We potentially even affect the way we again, shuttling oxygen, but also like blood pressure in general on top of that. DHA gets degraded. So again, like all of these semiconductors, melanopsin dysfunction, any sort of neuropsin dysfunction as well, like all of these like directly tie in with how well we handle oxygen. Because again, we're downgrading the system to try and accompany to what our body can fundamentally handle. And of course, that's like inefficient. And then like the shuttling of energy and information throughout the body is just somewhat suppressed. So you've got to think like, for example, where I am, we spoke about this before you started recording, is that we're getting heaps of brownouts here. Like literally daily, we got brownouts. And some of them are not by plan, but then some of them are actually planned like, what's it called? I think voltage shedding. So essentially like you're cutting off a certain part of the circuit to protect it, right? You just think about that in the body. It's the exact same thing. We're cutting off a certain part. And of course, that will manifest as disease because energy and information and communication throughout the system is somewhat impaired. And I suppose you could even see that on like the level of like fascia as well, right? Where you get that soreness and tightness around you that like essentially, you know, you feel like you need to just like essentially get like a 1 hour massage on your neck or something.
Yes.
And it's the exact same thing, really. It's just like maybe there's just like a local brownout there, or it's like it's protecting itself from any more flow. And then I suppose the other thing as well is like, that I wanted to mention is like carbon dioxide. So again, like you've got the Bohr effect. So hemoglobin can be bound to oxygen. And you see that on blood work like hemoglobin, but it doesn't necessarily mean like how efficient is it at like releasing oxygen. And of course, like you can look at things like serum bicarbonate and other markers, because that's going to be reflective of carbon dioxide status. But you need those three gases, so nitric oxide, carbon dioxide, and oxygen to essentially release oxygen so it works. But what's important about that is like, this is how I sort of see like biomechanics and posture and all this stuff as well, is like the fact that we are trying to take in less oxygen and sleep apnea as well. Like you're making yourself like really bad posture, which essentially is like robbing Pete to pay Paul in terms of like getting soreness and like fucking up the system to prevent more oxygen from coming in, you know? And then it's just kind of like, well, infrared light, which we didn't really touch on, innervates like mitochondria big time in terms of like, it literally absorbs, cytochrome C oxidase literally absorbs it, water absorbs it, oxygen absorbs it. And again, like collagen production is tied to it as well, melatonin production. And you got to think like, so if we're practicing like CO2 retention exercises, do you think it's a good idea to do it under like blue light, not grounded, when I just explained those mechanisms? Probably not, right?
Yeah.
So it's just like, again, it's just got to come back to nature. You do breath work, but like you're not grounded or in sunlight. Or if you do like a workout, for example, you're doing like, I don't know, you're training biceps, but you're in blue light in like this environment that is just like incredibly hypoxic. It's like, it's a horrible scenario, really. It sets the body up for just like, as I said, like from like that power line standpoint, like there's lights start dimming, appliances don't work properly. And it gets to a stage where if that's chronic, then like the circuits actually blow out.
So let me get this straight then. So you said there about the breath holding, and of course this ties into the whole story about the CO2 and everything, allowing the oxygen to be released from the hemoglobin. So therefore, like a lot of people, they practice this, you know, these breathwork exercises and the CO2, building their CO2 tolerance and practicing these, breathing exercises. And the reason they're doing this is because it allows the hemoglobin to let go of the oxygen from the red blood cell and basically get utilized by the cell. So you're actually saying that in a counterproductive environment, such as in a blue lit and EMF rich environment where you're ungrounded and you are already producing a lot of stress, if you're exercising indoors, for example, this can be extremely damaging due to the fact that the oxygen cannot be handled appropriately within the mitochondria, and therefore it's too much of a stress causing damage.
Absolutely. Like, yeah, exactly right. Like you need that infrared light there to allow for the oxygen to be utilized properly. Because again, like oxygen, if it's a double-edged sword. Like we can't live with it, but we can't live without it, essentially. And what we need to do is like, it's this absolute dance of getting it to cytochrome C oxidase to allow the electrons to tunnel through, to build up this proton gradient to essentially create water at the end and drive life as we know it. Because again, like mitochondria drive this light that we spoke about, which governs these hormones and neurotransmitters down the line. So it's not just like the sunlight that's involved here. It's like how well are the mitochondrial engines working in each tissue, because that's going to innovate the hormones and the neurotransmitters and the cytokines and cell signaling and gene translation and transcription. Like all of these things down the line is essentially governed by this process of dancing with oxygen, this dance with oxygen, and essentially getting it to be reduced properly. So again, it's like obviously like context dependent with that, but like to me, if you could be grounded in infrared light doing the breath work versus not doing that and being in blue light, maybe it's like high EMFs, maybe it's just like you kind of have to make a calculated decision. Is it enough to drive this parasympathetic tone, and everything that encompasses what that has? But again, like it's just like if you did it outside, I imagine the results are just going to be 10x, because again, you're grounding to absorb electrons, which again, it will mitigate inflammation, but on top of that, it's also going to provide electrons for the photoelectric effect. And then on top of that, like infrared light, again, builds up water networks, creates this water as well on top, and also builds up things like melatonin and collagen. So again, like you're building up the semiconductors that are built to essentially send energy and information throughout the system. So I'm not saying it's like something that you shouldn't do, but it's just a better option. It's like being outside and doing it under sunlight. And again, it's just like applies to anything. When you're working, for example, right now, I'm outside. I always take all my calls outside. I'm generally like outside 95% of the day. Even if it was fucking cold here, I would just be sure to just like rug up, try and be grounded. It's just like optimizing your environment and trying to simulate nature as much as you can. But as I said, it's not that it's wrong. Like, of course, there's people that do this breath work or go to the gym under this artificial light and they seem to be doing okay. But again, I just think, you're kind of pissing in the wind to a degree, and because there's just a much better option that can literally 10x that progression.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I can definitely say based on my experience as well. Like yesterday I was at the beach and I was just sat there on a rock, and there was like just waves coming all the time, and I felt like super grounded, with the water touching my skin the entire time. And I was practicing some breath holding exercises, and it felt so effortless. I can't even tell you how effortless it felt. I felt like I could hold my breath forever. Whereas if I do the exact same thing indoors, I just feel like I just can't hold my breath as long. It's ridiculous. When I'm in nature, as well as what you explained earlier about the nitric oxide release as well, from the UV light, and you've got all just in this increased blood flow around the body and the oxygenation of the tissues. It just feels like your body just doesn't need as many breaths when you're in a natural environment, and then your HRV as well is naturally improved because of the connection with nature, because of the grounding, the sunlight, and gathering this energy from the earth. Your body's sort of rebalancing this bioelectricity, this electrical balance within the system. It's not sort of, thrown off, and you're not in this stressed, agitated state, this hypoxic state, because hypoxia, again, is reinforcing, I can imagine, the sympathetic activity within the system, right? So it's making you more sympathetically driven automatically when you're hypoxic. Whereas when you are, you're having more oxygen and your cells are getting what they need, and they're able to process that energy to make that mitochondrial water and the ATP, you're able to be more in a parasympathetic state. So before we move into, the benefits of grounding and the photoelectric effect, I would like to go back a little bit and talk a bit about the types of metabolism, because a lot of people think that the food that they eat influences their metabolism, right? And the type of metabolism that they are using. This is why there's so many diet wars online. They don't actually fundamentally understand that it's got so much to do whether there is a presence or an absence of oxygen, and therefore that determines the fuel utilization as well, but also the type of light that you are exposed to, right, as well, because it's not so much to do with the food. Of course, food and the quality of the food, the timing of the food is super, super important. I'm not saying that food is not important. I'm just saying that there are other governing factors which control our metabolism be like way more than the type of food that we are eating. Would you agree? And therefore that is changing also the biophoton emission as well, because I know that carbs, for example, or glucose metabolism is emitting a different type of biophoton emission compared to fatty acid oxidation and all of this. Can you dive a little bit into this topic?
Yeah. So like first and foremost with food, right? If you compare it to like the cleaner forms of energy in terms of sunlight and grounding, food And just before I even get into that, like the interface, I mentioned the skin and the eyes, and I just touched on the gut. Of course, they're like interfaces between your external and internal environment, and the gut is very much the same. And just what's important to note here as well is like some people have like such chronic gut issues, and it's not even like fixed from like just doing the circadian stuff, because of course you have to just go a bit deeper. But mechanistically, like oxygen tensions, as we said before, like if you have low oxygen tensions, low oxygen tensions in terms of like hypoxia, where like you're not utilizing oxygen correctly, it allows for like the like our colon is like filled with microbes. It's like the most abundant place literally in our whole body, and of course like these little bugs help us thrive and keep our system in check as well. But when we alter the oxygen tensions there, well, essentially like through being hypoxic in the rest of our body, it's predominantly meant to be anaerobic, and it will start to allow for pathogenic aerobic strains to overrun the system, and that can cause like dysbiosis, inflammation, and again like that inflammation is like leakage of like light basically, and like changes in like the biophoton emissions there, which again like in terms of its interactions, you've got the immune system, like 70% of your immune system there. You've got your whole gut lining, you've got the vagus nerve, you've got the sacral parasympathetic nerves there that all innervate the rest of the nervous system. And again, like it's just like this huge fire that we're trying to put out by downgrading all these semiconductors. And this is another one that I didn't mention, is like on our nerves is myelin, which in itself also has like mitochondrial components and shuttles light and electrons throughout the system as well. So again, just another piece of hardware. But your question in terms of food, so like I think like in terms of food consumption, we do get some, like, of course, we get electrons and protons from food. Like food predominantly provides the protons really, when you think about it, because we're going to get electrons via like the photoelectric effect from sunlight. And then we're going to get electrons from grounding. So essentially it's going to provide that on top of electrons. It's going to provide the carbons as well. So again, we're going to get a little bit of carbon dioxide from it through the TCA cycle. And what I think food is though, truly, is just like, I think more so it should be tied to biomass. So again, like glycolipids, cell membranes, all these things that essentially are fundamental to a cell, like the material of it, for it to work correctly. We get that from food, obviously. We can't get that from fucking grounding or sunlight. It just adds energy to the system. And I think like the more you're missing like grounding and sunlight on top, the more you're reliant on food to essentially get those electrons and protons that you're missing from sunlight and grounding. Now, you asked me about glucose metabolism versus like fatty acid metabolism and all these things, right? So again, a lot of people say that like fatty acids come through, they get processed through beta oxidation and then get fed into TCA cycle, and then it only gets into complex 2. That's not actually correct. So like we got complex 1, 2, or complex 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, obviously, to make ATP at the end. And we've already touched on cytochrome C oxidase at complex 4. But again, like we're still using complex 1. But the only nuance is that there's going to be a bit of a skew when we use fatty acids. We're going to predominantly rely on complex 2. Not always. But again, like there is a bit of a light show going on down there as well. For example, like NAD+, which is fed into complex 1, absorbs UV light, emits blue. And then that blue light gets absorbed by a flavin called FADH2. And then that emits it, and it emits like a orangey red light. And then that will get passed on to cytochrome C oxidase, which is again is tied to infrared light to allow that to spin. So we have a bit of a dance in terms of that. In terms of like the actual emissions, I mean, at the end of the day, it still just comes down to like oxygen metabolism and how we use it.
Yes.
That seems to be like the main source of biophotons that we know of, and that's proven by Roland Van Wyck and Fritz Popp. But again, like, do I think that there's other reactions going on that may be potentially driving these light emissions that are controlling timing and signaling and just energetics of and coherence of like our biology? Absolutely. So I think like, you know, the deuterium in our bloodstream, in terms of like other oxygen-based reactions, I think like just like transduction of energy, all of these things I think are like allowing us to create this coherent light that allows us to communicate with the system. But again, just to answer your question there, because it was a bit of a tangent, I think like, yeah, there is certain different light emissions. And of course, that's going to kind of be reflective of like the light dark cycles and how much UV is present at that area. So for example, I'm in the tropics, there's going to be UV light, more so here. Of course, like the UV index today is like fucking 12 or something like that. So there's just like some dogs fucking fighting here.
Don't worry about it.
Should be okay though.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's all right. It's the Philippines. But yeah, like UV index was 12 today. So I can get away with eating a bit more carbohydrates. The food and water here is naturally going to be higher in deuterium, but I'm making more vitamin D, which is tied to like insulin sensitivity. Again, like it can control the electron transport chain. Nitric oxide also has some effects as well around that. Yeah, so, and even within that, like UV light, this is why blue is absolutely fundamental to have with UV, because the UV helps decay the tyrosine kinase receptor to essentially prevent us, like it's kind of like a threshold for insulin release. So we're not releasing too much, but of course, like when you have those pulses of blue light at night, it's just you're never closing the feedback loop.
Awesome. Really, really awesome stuff. So you mentioned previously about these semiconductors, like the water inside our body and melanin, and also like DHA. These are all, semiconductors in our system, and also the fascial network. Maybe you can explain to the audience, like, what do you mean by that? Like, what is a semiconductor? What does it do? What are their roles in the body? And I guess this also ties into their importance in our biology in general, right? Because a lot of people think that melanin is a sign of skin damage. They don't understand why it's important to eat fish, to get the DHA. No one really understands the fact that you can actually hydrate yourself from sunlight. So maybe go a little bit into all of these things, if you can kind of tie them all together and why they're actually vital for our health.
Yeah, I suppose like if you look at it like from the abundance of all of them, so like 85% of our body's connective tissue, more or less, and of course like water is like 50 to 70% of our body's water, sometimes even more when you're a kid. And of course, like that depends on your age. On top of that, like red blood cells, 85% of our cells are red blood cells, which contain hemoglobin, and hemoglobin contains literally, if you search chlorophyll, which is tied to photosynthesis in plants, it looks the exact same, except there's an iron instead of a magnesium in hemoglobin. And on top of that, like DHA is just found in huge abundance in our cell membranes, especially like in our nervous system and in our skin and in our heart, but like everywhere basically. On top of that, I mentioned the aromatic amino acids. I mentioned cholesterol. I mean, like myelin, like that literally covers nerves. And again, as I said before, like there's recent research that it acts as a buffer for protons and it contains like mitochondrial complexes. So again, like we're using oxygen in these areas as well to locally make light, ATP, and water. And then, yeah, as I said, like with collagen, so like 1/3 or 50% or something of our body is made of collagen. So you kind of just think, well, if we got all of these things in abundance and they all have some sort of research that they're connected to like semiconduction, Becker's found that around like collagen as an example, and like it uses like a dopant of copper, and again it ties to hydroxyapatite in the bone, and that if you inject a 1 nanoampere current in that, it can regenerate bone. So, I mean, like, that's pretty cool within itself. And of course, he's done like further research. And I mean, like, you can tie in like acupuncture and like how the hot spots of that have like higher electrical resistance. You can tie in the chakras as well on that energy level. So again, like we're kind of tracing back here to like historically with like how the spiritual connections, like they knew this sort of stuff. They knew about the flow of like chi or prana or whatever you want to call it. And I just think like when you have that abundance and that much proof, and I forgot to mention melanin there, but of course, like melanin is just huge as well when it comes to this, like arguably more important because again, like we evolved to get rid of our hair and migrate some of our melanin internally into our organs. And again, like because we're more complex, we've got more light emissions, we need like a rectifier of that, which is melanin. It like absorbs free radicals and light and like kind of spits out more light and acts as like a fine-tuning mechanism and also acts as like a capacitor. So again, like there's research like around melanin, and I'm sure you've probably read into it, but like NASA have done some research that it's one of the most powerful semiconductors on the planet. And then I read a paper maybe a couple of weeks ago that like when melanin's hydrated, and of course like this is where we connect back into oxygen and how well that's handled, and that's literally how it all starts, but that water hydrates melanin. And we talk about like the dielectric constant of water, which is being 160, provided it has no deuterium in it, and it's like supercharged by infrared light. And what dielectric constant is like how much electromagnetic energy we can store into it. But then on top of that, like melanin, and that's like 160, but melanin has a dielectric constant of 1,000. So it's like it can absorb so much charge, so much energy that we can use later on. And I mean, like I could talk about melanin forever, but essentially like with these semiconductors, it's like it's rectifying electrical circuits. It's not just like rectifying them, but like amplifying them, filtering them, allowing for light emissions, like modulation of all these electron signals and photon signals to essentially govern our biology. because again, it's not just fucking, ATP, it phosphorylates something, and then that phosphorylates something, and then, you know, there's this whole cycle, and then it somehow goes to the nucleus, and then all of a sudden we have these fucking genes expressed. It's just like, it doesn't work like that. And again, I think it's just like, because physics was like discovered at the same time as biochemistry, it just kind of like, we took it for what it is. But of course, like, you just think like, the technology is pretty amazing. Like, we're using technology right now. Like, I'm using a MacBook Air, and of course it's got a semiconductor chip in it, but it's silicon, and for us it's like carbon. And we have to remember, like, we are far more complex than what a laptop is, and that's why we don't just use silicon semiconductors. We use carbon based, and we use many of them. As I said before, like, everything I just mentioned, and I'm probably missing a few, all govern like the transfer of energy and information throughout our system. And as I said before, if you look at it like power lines, so just imagine, again, you're from Europe, imagine power lines that span across every single country, and each country is like reflective of each tissue or each organ, right? And again, like, if you have like a wire down, you know, like, to say like the weather's really bad and the weather could be reflective of like inflammation to the body, it's either downgrades the system, because that's just what we do. We're not like power lines that like don't have that ability unless like you have workers on that. But again, like, it's just like, you start getting spots of brownouts. And what happens there, again, is like, that's what disease is. We can't use oxygen. We can't tunnel electrons. We can't recycle protons. And that's going to be indicative of what water, ATP, and everything down the line does. And just to, you know, because we've been on a bit of a tangent here throughout these probably last 40 minutes, and we've gone pretty deep, but the solutions are like UVA, UVB, infrared light, darkness at night, low stress, eating seasonally, exercising, like treating like your biomechanics, so like massages, myofascial release, and then I suppose there's like biohacks on top, like acupuncture or cold exposure, or whatever it is. But again, of course, like, cold exposure is obviously like a seasonal thing as well. So again, like, we talk about all this complex stuff, and of course, like, there's people who have chronic issues, and they may need an extra nudge around like doing deeper blood work, symptoms, everything in between. But from an optimization standpoint, it's just like, I mean, I'm outside, you know, we're both fucking tanned. We both got heaps of melanin. I think it's like, that's the proof's in the pudding in terms of what you need to do.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, Tina was telling me something funny yesterday. She was saying to me, if you're not tanned by the end of August, we can't be friends.
Well, you put in the work by the looks of it, so I think you're out of trouble.
You know, like, basically why she was kind of like saying that is because that, you know, anybody who takes care of their health on a fundamental level really reflects on the outside, right? Because our internal health, you know, our external appearance is a reflection of our internal environment and how we take care of ourselves, but also our relationship to nature and the sun, and basically with ourselves as well, our emotional state, and taking care of our spiritual health as well. And that literally glows on the outside, right? And if you are somebody who is stuck indoors and you're unaware, you're more likely going to be white and unwell, you know, and you see that with a lot of people on the beach who are not being exposed to nature the entire year. And then they go outside for 2 weeks, they blast themselves in the sun, they put a ton of sunscreens on, you know, with all those like photochemicals, which are, you know, could potentially be very dangerous if they go into the lymphatic system and the bloodstream and all that kind of stuff. And also their reactivity with the sun too on the skin. And then that literally reflects, you know, a sign of not being so healthy, because, you know, you're white as a ghost, and now you're not able to utilize the sun because you're not taking the time to be in connection with nature every single day. And what we're talking about is these, me and Jack, is this doing these small daily acts on a daily basis, which are going to have a massive impact in the long term. It doesn't mean you need to spend like the whole time outdoors, but you need to definitely be in connection with nature at least once per day, whether that is to put your bare feet on the grass or to get in the sea, or, you know, to see the sunrise. You need to be outside as much as possible, because that's how we have evolved as human beings, and that is just the natural way of living. And when you actually look at it, you know, our divorcing ourselves from nature is actually what has contributed to a lot of the disease that we are facing today. Do you have more time, Jack, or are you running out of time?
I'm good. And I think that was great what you said. And I will say, I probably disagree. I think like one time out of nature, I just think in the modern world, it's just simply not enough. I think it's like, you really have to do your best in terms of like, at least like 50% or more, you know, because it's just, I don't know, like I've tried to tell people that, and then, you know, you really kind of fail, essentially. Like, it's just like you need to be outside as much as you can, and that's a harsh reality. I mean, like, and a lot of people are working jobs that are compromising their health, and it's like, okay, cool, you can try all the biohacks and supplements and everything you want, but again, if you're not copying nature for at least 50% of the day, and you're not spending time outside as much as you can, I mean, like, it's going to set yourself up for failure, you know. And I think what you said was great around melanin and that glow. Because I think, like, melanin is essentially like a proxy, like, on the outside for, like, how much sunlight you're getting, obviously. And then, like, on a biochemical level, it's like seeing your vitamin D. I think, like, obviously seeing that is going to be reflective in terms of what's going on, unless you're, like, supplementing. But when we tie it back to sunlight and intolerance to sunlight, and how, like, sunburn, melanomas, all these things are obviously on the rise. And mind you, like, the melanomas are occurring on places that you don't get sunlight. But again, like, it makes, like, after I explained everything to you in terms of, like, downgrading your hardware to adjust to just, like, blue light, no infrared, no UV, it makes complete fucking sense that, like, if you were outside after your semiconductors are literally downgraded from, like, a disconnection of nature, it's like, and just try and getting some sunlight, like, in the middle of the day and trying to, you know, get a tan or whatever it is, like, it's literally akin to, again, I just refer to power lines because it just makes sense to me. But, like, you have, like, the power lines that feed your houses, and then you have the transmission towers. It's like literally trying to fucking connect the transmission towers to the power lines that feed your house. And what's going to happen is it's just going to arc and spark because, again, like, your body isn't built to harness it.
Yeah, exactly. You can't, like, just ignore nature the entire year, and all of a sudden, because it's your holiday time or whatever, you go for 2 weeks to the tropics or somewhere, like, really, really hot, like Egypt or whatever, and you literally fry yourself in the sun with these, like, chemicals on your skin and expect that you're going to feel good. You know, I know a lot of people who get, like, how do you call it? Where they get, like, heat stroke, and then they get, like, super burnt, and then they're not feeling good, and then they blame the sun. And I'm like, yeah, but you didn't, the entire year, especially in the winter time, for example, you can be outside and just be with a jacket if you're cold or whatever, and you can literally just be exposed to the natural light the entire day. There's literally almost no UV in the winter, and you can just build your tolerance to the brightness and the sun and just be exposed every single day a little bit, like I do. Like, every single day I'm outdoors all year round, 365 days a year. I never miss a single swimming session. You know, every single morning I do that, you know, 365 days a year. So therefore I'm connected with the elements. I'm getting the cold in the wintertime. I'm getting the grounding every single morning. And, you know, in that way, I'm able to build my solar colors and my ability to tolerate these changes, in these environmental changes. So when the summer arrives, it doesn't really feel like summer has arrived, because it just feels like my body changed in the rhythm of nature, as we should, right? So it's sort of like we are riding on these rhythms, like all of my clocks inside my body, my skin clocks, everything is changing with the season as well. So it's not just about, people just can't grasp the fact that your body's supposed to be wired to nature every single day to be able to tolerate the changes in seasonality. So therefore we don't get sick as easily in the wintertime. We don't feel cold in the wintertime. We don't feel too hot in the summertime. We're able to tolerate the sunlight more. Our eyes feel comfortable by being outdoors without sunglasses and all of these things.
Yeah, 100%. And I just think, like, you really, like, in the modern world with so much stress, and again, I don't want to fear inject people around it, because I don't think that's the right route to go either. I think, like, that's obviously going to do more harm than good. But, like, you really have to go the extra mile now. It is what it is. Like, there's no real way around it. You have to be completely honest with yourself and be like, am I doing the best I can? Am I feeling the best I can? Because again, you mentioned spiritual health, which I think is just, like, super important. And maybe, you know, maybe I just get frustrated seeing people run at like 20% of their capacity. And I'm just like, you can do so much more. Like, you can, I want to see you unlock your full potential. And again, like that spiritual health, of course, like, leads to, like, your purpose and mental clarity, and everything's just rolled out to you on a fucking red carpet where, like, you're like, okay, I know what I need to do on this planet. But again, like, to achieve spiritual health, you need to unlock physical and mental health, like, at its peak. And for that, of course, like, you need to be going the extra mile. And of course, like, when you get to a certain stage of your journey, you don't need to be taking, like, you can get away with a bit more. Like, for example, I don't really care as much about what I eat these days. Like, I'm a bit less neurotic about it. I, like, have flexibility. I enjoy my food. Whereas like if someone had like chronic gut issues and it's just been going on forever, for example, I got a client right now who has like gut issues, like yeast, bacteria, SIBO, mold, like all these tests came back. And then on top of that, like metabolic issues and what else? Like liver enzymes are elevated, dehydration, like all these things. You got to think, well, okay, he kind of needs to go the extra mile with like potentially like supplementation, because again, modern problems require modern solutions.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, he's going to be have to be extremely like strict on like everything else to get himself back up to baseline. And once you're back up to baseline, obviously things flow a bit better and you don't have to worry about this stuff as much. But I would say that like majority of the people out there, like they're just at suboptimal health. And I suppose like, I don't know if it's a bit harsh to even say that, but just like, I just want people to do as best they fucking can, you know?
Yeah.
And I just think that no one is really doing as much as like they should be. And I think people love to make excuses around like jobs or whatever it is. But again, you just have to go the extra mile.
Yes.
Doesn't mean you have to move to fucking Philippines like myself, you know, like that's obviously like just like a choice of mine. And of course it came with sacrifices, but it's just like, are you outside like, you know, half your day? Are you like, if you work from home, can you put your laptop outside? Can you ground? Can you go to the gym outside, like work out outside? Like it's just all these things just add up. It's all little 1%ers.
Oh yeah, I loved what you said there about the spiritual health and just embodying your highest self and realizing your true purpose. And it's for sure tied 1000% to your physical health as well, right? Because this is exactly why we're having this discussion today. You could say that, you know, our discussion is really just about trying to up-level your biology, your physical state as much as you can, so that you can be an anchor to embody your true and highest self really on a daily basis and realize your true purpose and potential in this world and be the best version for yourself and to others as well. Because if you can be, you know, better to yourself, you can also treat others better, because you're going to feel good, you're going to be in a good mood, you're going to feel more fulfilled in your life. And this is exactly why it's so important that we're having this discussion, because our connection with nature is literally a spiritual experience. It's a psychedelic experience. Like life is meant to be psychedelic. And I feel like this is why there is so much depression and anxiety these days, because we are locked away from our true purpose and our reality. The true reality, and because we can live in two realities at once right now, you know, the technological reality through technology and blue lights and screens, and the actual real reality, which is the real world where we are supposed to be interfacing in. And because we are not in the real world as much as we are in the digital world, it's hijacking our focus and our attention. So we're thinking that all of the answers and all of the connections are through the screen, whereas actually, if we just be in the present moment and we observe our environment and our surroundings and we're in connection with nature and the people around us, that will automatically make us 1,000 times happier. That's what I noticed personally for myself anyway, that if I spend a lot of time on my technology and I've dissociated from my environment, when I come off, I automatically feel more depressed or anxious, or I feel just a lack of purpose. But as soon as I'm just taking a little bit of time, doing a bit of breath work, being outside, you know, go for a dip in the sea, I instantly start to feel better. And I start to realize, this is actually the real purpose. This is where I'm actually supposed to be and where my focus should be. But of course, we are using the technology to connect, you know, across the globe right now, like you and me are. And that's such a beautiful gift and a blessing. But it's so important to not get caught in this, you know, in this other reality, thinking that what we see online is the truth, because there is so much bullshit out there, as you mentioned before we started the interview, so much misinformation. And this is exactly the perfect example what happened in COVID, right? Where everybody believed what they saw on the screen. And then therefore we saw the manifestation of all of this fear on the streets, right? Because people literally believed that their digital reality was more real than their immediate environment around them.
Yeah, and I think just like fear within itself it's a way to control, because as we said before, fear induces hypoxia. Hypoxia like downgrades your semiconductors, essentially induces inflammation, and then you just can't think clearly, and then you listen, because that's all you got listening to, because it's fucking here, there, and everywhere. And we saw how it worked out for like the COVID vaccine and the repercussions around that. And again, with that within itself, by the way, like the COVID jab, it targets everything that I just mentioned. It downgrades your semiconductor system. And on top of that, like you've got everything else, the EMFs, blue light, stress, all of it acts synergistically. Now, does that mean that you're fucked if you have the COVID jab? Absolutely not. Like there's people that were going to fear that. And it's like, well, it's like the past is the past. It's just what matters is what are you going to do with your time now? Are you going to try and copy nature as much as you can in the modern world? That's the most important part. And I think, of course, like the mind and the emotions are so fundamental around that. And I think you mentioned something really good around spirituality, but I've forgotten how you quoted it. But it just reminded me that like with like these biophotons, again, like there's so much, like not a lot of research, but there's decent amounts of research around like diseases are linked to light being leaked out, essentially, like not light funneled into the system. So light is leaked out. And that's, of course, when you think about light as like packets of energy and information, you're losing it to the system. And we see like shifts in terms of like blue shifts or red shifts in certain conditions. And what's interesting is like just meditating, there was like I think Roland Van Wyck did a study. So again, Light and Shaping Life is a good book for those who want to read more, but he has a lot of good papers as well. And he mentioned that like people who meditated, they lowered their biophoton emissions, so they became more coherent. And this was probably done in blue light, you know, like, so again, imagine if that was done out in nature, with the sun, it would just be like huge in terms of what happens there. So again, like when we connect to nature, as you said, like going in the water, getting the lights, eating your meals outside, all these things that are just so crucial to essentially replicate what nature does, it unlocks coherence, and coherence unlocks coherence not only within yourself, but coherence with like the universe. And this is where the spirituality thing comes in. So then this is where like, I don't know, you see people, I don't know, Russell Brand as an example, becomes healthy all of a sudden and just fucking loves God. And it's like, okay, well, you know, you see that pattern a lot. I mean, like myself included, I'm not religious or anything, but I do love God. And like, I do believe that there is something out there that it's like, if you have your semiconductors intact and you're coherent, you can tune into the divine, God, universe, whatever you want to call it. And again, you get guided. You get these synchronicities that are kind of like fragments of the universe that are leaving you clues like, oh, you're on the right path. You may see like this animal or whatever it is, or a color. And yeah, I just think it ultimately comes down to optimal health, optimal human, optimal functioning. And then you unlock all of these deeper levels. And I think maybe I come off as a bit like of a dick when I sort of push this onto people. Or like sometimes I come off as a dick because like I will just like disregard people who don't want to listen. Again, it's just like I just want to unlock the best version of everyone, because I just think everyone has like their potential. They have their purpose. They have their passion. You just haven't found it yet. And the way you find it is by connecting to nature and optimizing your health.
1000%. So well said. Yeah, I mean, it's true that, you know, if you're outdoors, you're going to have the best ideas and the best visualizations or inspiration for whatever you're working on, you know, whether you're an artist or someone who's doing something extremely complex, like some biophysics or something like that. I always have the best ideas for sure when I'm working out, and especially outdoors. I just find that I'm getting the best inspiration and I'm just tuning into something greater than myself. The ideas are not coming from my head. They're literally just being thrown into my head. And I'm just like, oh, that sounds like a great idea. And then I just write it down on my notepad, you know, and I just save it for later and I just expand on it. And it's just so awesome when you actually start to listen to these synchronicities, like you said, and you're more in tune with yourself and you're more observant, and you notice that there is something greater than yourself governing your biology, right? And this is basically what you're saying, that if our semiconductors and all of these systems of the body are able to harness and anchor this greater power, this greater collective consciousness or whatever it is, you know, we're then able to download this information and have these revelations that are able to give us these like massive breakthroughs. So let's now move on to, or let's continue on the path of biological optimization, so we can keep on anchoring this energy that we're talking about. So let's move into the grounding. Why is it so powerful, and what is the mechanism in how it works? So like, could you explain the mechanism to us?
Yeah, so I touched on it a bit earlier, but to go a bit more in depth. So essentially, like, we have sweat glands on our hands and our feet. A lot of our ancestral primates didn't have this ability. And again, like, this can tie in with like the evolution in terms of like our fur and the melanin on the outsides when we were primates versus like now we obviously have less on our surfaces. And with grounding, it's just like when you do sweat, Like if you've ever worn earth runners, like even in the cold, you wear them and you'll tend to sweat a little bit. So you're naturally going to be sweating a bit when you touch the earth. And when that happens, of course, it's going to increase conductivity. And when that occurs, you have this flow of electrons that go through your fascia. And of course, that's going to be acting as energy, basically, or the shuttling of energy and information. And as we know, like electrons are connected to redox reactions as well. So if there's inflammation in the body, free radicals that essentially create oxidative stress, which is inflammation, what happens is like we use these electrons, which can be built up in our water networks in our fascia and donated directly. So again, like by doing this, you're essentially bypassing the biochemical redox loop of like vitamin E, vitamin C, glutathione, NADPH. You're bypassing that loop basically by like having this abundance of electrons and protons in your water networks. That's one thing. The other thing that grounding does, I mean, there's two things. So I already mentioned that, like with the photoelectric effect. So more electrons you have, photons only interact with electrons. So essentially like the photon is a packet of energy and information from sunlight or any sort of light source. And what that fundamentally does is that energy will get absorbed into the electron, and then the electron has that energy and information. Okay. And then of course that can get transduced into another, like it can emit it as another photon, and it can be like a game of hot potato, or it can also be funneled into the system in terms of a different form of energy. Maybe it's a soliton, as I mentioned before. Maybe it's a proton tunneling or proton conduction, should I say. Or again, as I said, like another light emission. The third thing is that grounding also yokes you to the Earth's magnetic field. So we know about the Schumann resonance. That's the Earth's natural magnetic heartbeat. And it comes in like harmonics of like 7.83 hertz, which again, like we rounded off to 8. And then we got like, I believe it's like 10 or like 12 and then like 20. There's like these certain bands that resonate at the same frequencies as our brainwaves. So as an example there, like the Schumann resonance predominantly sits at that 8 hertz, but of course it has different bands. And if we have it in that, we want to be at that 8 hertz because that's connected to alpha waves. And alpha waves is like that calm Zen focus during the day. So you're calm, confident, calculated, collected in terms of like everything you do, your decisions, the way you just go about your day. It's kind of like that aura essentially where like you see it in someone, like, fuck, they're pretty calm, aren't they? And then of course, on the other end of that is like you want those alpha waves at night because they're going to innovate theta waves, which is connected to sleep architecture, deep sleep, non-REM, 1, 2, 3, and REM sleep. So again, you need that signal. And of course, like we're not grounded at night, but what's important more than anything is like removing the noise at night. So this is where like electromagnetic fields, especially like dirty electricity, which we actually spoke about before the call as well, is that their bands sit at about 50 or 60 hertz. So again, that's going to fuck up sleep architecture big time. And just like the transitions between like non-REM and REM sleep. But yeah, of course, on top of that, you've got like electromagnetic fields in general. And that in itself, if we want to get into it, I mean, it's going to allow calcium influx inside the cell. And again, it's going to disrupt mitochondrial metabolism. But on top of that, like the calcium influx has to be mitigated. So we see like a dysregulation in terms of like ions. So potassium leaks out, sodium becomes dysregulated. And then on that biochemical level, we see like imbalances between glutamate and GABA. And then down the line, this is where we see hormones fuck up too. This is where we see DHT essentially, which we didn't even speak about, but like a lot of people speak about testosterone, but arguably like DHT is like the opposite to estrogen. So this is what needs the spotlight, but that can form neurosteroids that essentially try and combat the calcium influx from EMFs. And then on like the woman's side, there's also like progesterone, which will form GABAergic compounds that will try and mitigate it as well. So again, you get like this soup of just like dysregulation and imbalances, like from like a hormonal level, neuronal level, and like biophysical and biochemical level in general. But again, I'm sort of like going deep into the weeds here, but the grounding, as I said, Schumann resonance, photoelectric effect, and providing electrons for redox reactions.
And so when people are exposed to these non-native EMFs and also this dirty electricity, how does grounding benefit us then? Does it actually allow us, because from my understanding, from hearing many different podcasts and people, you actually absorb a lot of this dirty electricity into your body, and also from the EMFs as well, you absorb a lot of this voltage, the stray voltage or whatever they call it. And when you are grounded, does it allow this dirty electricity and accumulated voltage to dissipate from your body to, flow into the earth? Would that be correct?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like on power lines, again, like we earth everything. Like, so we earth the transformers, we earth like the switches, like so all the hardware is earthed as like a protective mechanism. So you got to think like our bodies are no different, and I suppose that's where like it's probably fundamental to be grounding as much as you can. I would say like worst case scenario, if you're able to discharge it in the morning, let's just say before you go to work or something, like that's at least going to be better than nothing. And I would say that's probably like the best time too, because that's probably where there's like an accumulation and a lack of electron flow coming through. Did that answer your question?
It was just more about like, do we get rid of this dirty electricity and voltage from the system? Are we able to sort of recalibrate the electrical potential within the cells? Because I can imagine that the EMFs, for example, the non-native electromagnetic fields coming from cell phones, cell towers, Wi-Fi, for people who don't know what EMFs are, they're these like invisible waves that's connecting your phone to, or your technology to, everything else. And they are affecting us on a biological level, as Jack is describing. And we're now talking about the importance of grounding because of this environmental stressor on our body, right? And our body, because it's conductive, we're absorbing a lot of this crap in our body, even whether we like it or not, just by living in a city. And so this is why we're saying that connection with nature is vital. But I'm just trying to understand the mechanism in by which grounding helps the body to get rid of this sort of, you could call it stress or voltage or whatever, or the stray voltage or charge that is not native to our biology, causing this chaos or incoherence. And of course, you also mentioned about gathering the electrons, right? So that's probably rebalancing the charge within the system. But maybe explain to me, how does the grounding help us rebalance the electrical potential of the cell? Because doesn't the cell run on a specific negative millivolt charge? And when that millivolt charge changes, we also see the manifestation of disease.
Yeah. So there's a book called Healing is Voltage. I don't know who it's by, but he talks specifically about this, how you have a certain charge, a certain voltage in negative millivolts. So again, like when it's negative, of course, there's more electrons in the system.
Yeah.
But when it comes to neurotransmitters, like action potentials in like neurons and stuff, or like just like cell signaling, that voltage will change. So again, like there is going to be potential disruptions in the voltage if there's a lack of electrons or just like energy in the system that can regulate these ions that contain charges. And just to note, like when we talk about EMFs as well, it's still light. Like it's still like light is an electromagnetic wave. And when we talk about electromagnetic fields, like we're not only talking about just like light from sunlight, but X-rays, gamma rays, cosmic rays, but of course like the artificial ones in this case is like Wi-Fi routers, cell towers, and so on and so forth. And the way I like to see that is just like microwaves, exactly. So it's just like, it's blue light that you can't see, essentially. It's still going to have like very similar effects, but of course it's going to be a bit more, it's got less energy per se, but again, it has all these like deeper effects. It can reach different tissues compared to blue light. But again, like the body's a whole coherent system. So like whatever touches your surface is going to innervate the internal system anyway. But yeah, like with your question with grounding and like it mitigating it. So it will mitigate it to a degree. But again, it's like, how inflamed is someone? It's going to be like an N equals 1. It depends on the context of how sick someone is, how much someone has issues. For the general human being who wants to optimize, I think it's a great thing to be doing, is just like putting your feet on the earth. I would say to even level that up is like putting water on the surface that you're grounding. So again, like you're enhancing the conductivity directly there. You're obviously wanting to ground on grass over like concrete, because that's going to have different effects within itself, because like there's going to be better flow of electrons through the grass, or just on earth per se. So yeah, like your question's a good one. I just think there's a nuance to it in terms of like what level it would be. But yeah, like on that biophysical level, providing electrons to the system is going to help mitigate oxidative stress. It's going to regulate cell function, and on top of that, it's going to allow us to interact with light and yoke us to the Schumann resonance. So again, like these are all beneficial things that like restore us to homeostasis, so we can like thrive.
So I can imagine, based on all of that you just said there, that's going to be very beneficial for our nervous system state, and it's going to allow us to come more into this parasympathetic state. I notice myself that when I get grounded every day, especially in the sea, because it's like super conductive in water, right? then I just find that my nervous system is so much more relaxed when I get out of the water. I just feel like my heart rate is so much lower. I just feel calm. My vision is more sharp. Everything is just so much better when I've gotten grounded. Whereas if I just get sunlight without the grounding, I actually feel that is more stressful on my biology. But whereas if I get the sunlight while grounding, I feel that I'm getting a massive benefit. Do you think there's something to that?
Yeah, I mean, this is like circling back to the start of our conversation now when we were talking about how breathwork would be better done under sunlight and grounding. So yeah, exact same principles there. I think when there was never a time where we wouldn't be grounded under at least some form of sunlight, or having the plants reflect infrared light, or just being in the shade and getting a ton of infrared light as well as a bit of UV, like will probably scatter essentially and still interact with our biology. So I just think that like anything that's going to simulate nature in terms of where you are, and of course like this can be tied to temperature as well, so cold, sweating, like all of these things have influences on top too. And I think it's just like the more of those you're doing, so for example, like right now I'm sweating a little bit, it's not like super hot, but again, I could have like a fan on me right now and it would alter my biology like a little bit, you know, like it's all these things. Like it's just like the more you can sort of reflect what your modern, like what your natural environment is doing where you live, the better it is.
So a lot of people are spending time outdoors thinking that they are gathering vitamin D. And then, you know, they're going and getting blood tests and they notice that their vitamin D levels are still low, even though they're getting adequate amounts of sunlight and they're doing all the things. Why do you think some people have low vitamin D status, even though they're doing, you know, they're living the circadian life?
Yeah, so there's probably three things. The first one would be, I'll start with this one. So I think like inflammation, immune activation. So again, this is tying in what's going on in the nature of the gut, on the skin, just overall health, thymus gland, all these things that control like the immune function and infections and everything else that the immune system's fundamental for. If we see, because vitamin D is directly tied to regulating that. So again, it's like an antidote to the autoimmune pathways or just autoimmune conditions in general, because it's going to increase Treg cells as opposed to like overdriving Th1, 2, and 17. So again, like if you see low vitamin D, of course, like you'd want to be looking at white blood cells as well. You want to be looking at all these other markers that will reflect what's going on in the immune system, for one. Let's just say hypothetically white blood cells are fine. Then you'd be looking at vitamin D and like you see it low. And then you'd be thinking, okay, so one reason is because of light environment, because vitamin A and vitamin D have this like synergistic relationship with one another. And when vitamin A gets fucked up, because that's going to be tied to like light cycles. Again, like every single opsin is bound to retinol, sorry. And this retinol goes through a cycle with when blue light hits it or any sort of light hits it, and it gets recycled. But of course, like with blue light, you short circuit that system, as we know. So that's another reason why vitamin D could be tanked. And then on top of that, which kind of synergizes with this one, is the fact that vitamin D production. So we mentioned before, cholesterol, it absorbs certain light bands. And when UVB is present, which is about 280 to 315, when it absorbs around 290 nanometers with the 7-dehydrocholesterol, that will photoisomerize, so like a light-induced reaction without an enzyme, to form pre-vitamin D3. And then for pre-vitamin D3 to form vitamin D3, which again will get circulated through into the liver to convert to that 25-OHD, which is connected to what we measure in the blood, that requires, it's a thermal isomerization step. So it requires like a heat-based reaction that bends the molecule in a certain way to form vitamin D3. And that requires proper hydration. So again, we're tying back yet again to what goes on with oxygen production or oxygen metabolism at the cytochrome C oxidase. That is the most important step that essentially regulates what's going on with vitamin D as well. So it's just no surprise there that just like everything sort of circles back to the same thing, doesn't it?
Oh yeah, it's absolutely fascinating, and I'm so happy that you brought it up in this discussion, because I wasn't planning on talking about that at all. But it's always so nice to learn new things that you're not aware of, right? Because you don't know what you don't know. So every time when a guest like brings to my awareness like new information, I'm always so fascinated. And this is definitely a topic which I absolutely love to, you know, learn more about, especially about the biophotons and how that's impacting our health. Like you mentioned, the status of our biophoton emission or the spectrum. But yeah, like, so basically I can imagine then, to summarize everything that we just said, like our connection with nature is optimizing our ability to utilize oxygen. And our disconnection with nature is divorcing or hampering our ability to utilize oxygen or to use it effectively or to handle it appropriately. And so when that happens, then there is this cellular chaos. We have this excess reactive oxygen species. We have mitochondrial dysfunction. We have, you know, these altered biophoton emission state. Whereas the other way around is, you know, everything positive, right? We have like, you know, mitochondrial biogenesis, we have like autophagy, we have apoptosis, we have all of the things that are supposed to be occurring and happening at the correct time of the day. Whereas if we're living a misaligned lifestyle, you know, divorced from nature, then it's going to alter our oxygen status. Like you mentioned the blue light, obviously, the non-native electromagnetic fields, the stress, the fear, but anything that causes stress really, because blue light and non-native EMFs, as you mentioned, they just place a tremendous amount of stress on our biology, right? And so this is causing this hypoxic state, like you mentioned, exercising under artificial
constant
blue lights. Say again?
Yeah, because the other thing just important to note there, sorry to interrupt, but yeah, it's the reason why light and thought, fear are the biggest drivers of this mechanism of stress. And the reason is because they can be constant. Like you can have, used to be obviously light was present for a certain period of time. Now light, and when we talk about light, it's not just like artificial light, but like EMFs in general, non-native EMFs, as we said before, it is constant in our environment. You can't take a break from it. It's not like just like eating a Mars bar and then, you know, you're good. And then you can go back to, you know, eating a healthy diet. You could be in this soup of essentially just like magnetic fields. And then on top of that, like the fear, thought, like negative thought patterns, trauma, like that stuff lives in your subconscious as well. And of course, like can affect you to day. So I think like they're the two big ones to address. But as you said, I think like you were about to say like gym, exercise, like in blue light environments, and just like, again, anything that doesn't reflect nature plays such a big role. And what you mentioned in terms of like mitochondrial biogenesis, autophagy, all these things, you're absolutely correct that like when we have a loss of those signals of apoptosis and autophagy, which again, regulated by cytochrome C oxidase and melatonin and the mitochondria itself, I mean, there's huge implications. And like in hypoxia, you've probably heard of pseudo-hypoxia when NAD plus drops. When NAD plus drops, we can't actually induce mitochondrial biogenesis, DNA repair, all these fundamental things for our biology to work correctly. And I just think like that within itself is like a downgrading process, isn't it? You're making less mitochondria to make less light, you know?
Yes.
So I just thought I'd just add that in there, but yeah.
No, that's fantastic. Thank you for your input. And also on the other end of the spectrum, just to tell people, like you just mentioned in this podcast, that, you know, it's so important to spend as much time outdoors as possible, get grounded, get as much light as you can, even if you're in the shade. You know, just find ways to connect with nature every single day, because that is just where we have evolved as human beings. And it just seems that the more we disconnect ourselves from that, the more disease begins to manifest, especially if you add on top of that a processed diet, lack of movement and exercise, not breathing through your nose, you know, just being in an artificially lit and non-native EMF environment, which is inducing a lot of stress on our biology. We're actually not meant to be in a sympathetic state the entire day. We're meant to be the majority of the time in a parasympathetic state. And every so often when we're hunting and gathering our food, or at certain times of the day when sun is the highest, we're meant to be in a sympathetic state, but we're meant to be, you know, just preserving our energy really and using it to optimize our biological functions, which is allowing us to anchor our highest self and allowing us to dig deeper into our spiritual health, like we talked about as well. Maybe I would ask you one last question, if it would be possible. I just want to thank you so much for your time and being so generous with your time. So my last question would be, how do you think that artificial blue lights and non-native EMFs control people? So how does it MK ultra people on a biochemical level?
Okay, well, this is probably going to be a decently long answer, but I'll try and shorten it as much as I can. So yeah, with blue light, I suppose like mechanistically, everything that we just spoke about, it leads to that downgrading of our bioelectrical infrastructure. And when we have that, we can't flow energy and information throughout the system properly. There's a lack of communication. Entropy rises, essentially. Organization drops within the body. And when that happens, you essentially just become more compliant because you just can't think for yourself anymore. And when you can't think for yourself, just think about what we're submerged in. We're submerged in technology with all this subliminal messaging throughout it, and the news, and when, of course, you're surrounded by that with like a population that's surrounded like in this sort of state, again, you're going to all just be like talking about the same shit. And be compliant to like what the centralized system essentially is. And of course, like you've got big pharma, big food, big tech, just massive in terms of how they control everything. And then on top of that, you got things such as like geoengineering and whatever else that is essentially trying to, not only affect us from the inside, but also the outside, and like modifying nature, and like fear injecting with climate change and all these things that, of course, it, like when you first hear about it, you're like, oh, that makes sense. But then I suppose when you take a step back, you're like, okay, maybe there's something fishy going on here. And I think, as I said before, like blue light enters through our eyes, enters through our skin. But I think like the biggest controller is like when blue light enters through our eyes, it gets fed through like the retinohypothalamic tract. And again, it has two stops. It stops in the hypothalamus, which I mentioned before, relates to like the brainstem, pituitary gland, the limbic system. So those pathways get destroyed. The neurotransmitters get destroyed. The myelin gets destroyed. The water networks get destroyed. And on top of that, you've got the habenular nucleus, which sits just adjacent to the thalamus, and that relates to your frontal lobes. And your frontal lobes is where something really important called your prefrontal cortex sits. And when those pathways, so again, that's going to connect dopamine, serotonin, noradrenaline, GABA, glutamate, acetylcholine, all these main neurotransmitters, which are essentially governed by light within themselves. But when you have defects locally in that area, the prefrontal cortex is tied to judgment, decision-making, clarity, purpose, executive function, working memory, like just so many things that essentially make us think for ourselves. And when you wipe out that pathway on top of the limbic system, because again, the limbic system is going to tie in your emotions and how you perceive something as a threat or as something as not a threat. And again, like as I said before, fear controls you. So if you cause defects all throughout the nervous system, and on top of that, like within your biology as well, and you have on this biophysical level sporadic light biophoton emissions, they're not coherent. There's shifts, so there's like red shifts and blue shifts, a lack of UV light being made endogenously, which again is tied to like making these sex hormones, steroid hormones, neurotransmitters, nitric oxide, vitamin D. Like if you don't have that, if you don't have those built in, like how the fuck do you think you're going to work properly? You can't. And this is of course where you just like lean on the easiest thing, and it's rolled out to you on a red carpet, is that there's big pharma, big tech, big food. They're all going to support you and save you. Essentially, they're the answer. The food pyramid, technology isn't bad. Pharmaceutical drugs are the way to go. Make sure you get vaccinated. So I think it's just like, I just think for me to explain it like that, it's just, how can I make this shit up? You know what I mean? It's just, the research is there, and it's like, it's almost just like, if you've ever seen Breaking Bad, it's just like Walter White is just sitting there in plain sight being this fucking like drug lord, absolute kingpin drug lord. And that's essentially what's happening. It's like all the research is there. It's just like they're so confident that no one can connect these dots. But then there's people that are starting to really wake up, I suppose, and trying to tell everyone else. And I think that's the job of both of us, to be honest. So
yes,
in all in all, like blue light and EMFs, I mean, we spoke about it throughout this whole podcast, but yeah, I think it's just this downgrade to essentially make us controllable and compliant and sick and weak. And especially as men, like when we talk about like hormones and stuff, like men are meant to be leaders, and, now we're estrogenic and changing genders.
That's so true. Oh my God. I think one of my questions was, why are people actually fat these days? We didn't get into that, but I want to be respectful of your time and not go any further. But yeah, like, as you mentioned, it's this, why I wanted to hear your answer about that, about the blue light and the EMFs, like MK ultraing people, is because I want them to realize that technology is, you could say, is almost specifically designed in this way, or like on purpose, to make us addicted to it, to make us, stuck and to be controlled by it. Because the longer we are on there, the more we are using their free apps, because there's nothing free in this world. You know, that we are paying with our soul, unfortunately. And when we are stuck on these apps, you know, they are able to harvest our energy and our money, right? Because then they can push advertisements on us and we can make irrational choices and decisions. We can order the fast food that we didn't intend to order, and we can order all the Chinese crap from online, which we didn't really need in our house. And so there is just like so much stuff that it makes you realize that you need to be aware of it. Otherwise, it's going to control you. And the more aware we are of it, is the more intentional we can be with our technology usage. And this is why it's so important to understand what it's doing to our biology on a fundamental level, because so many people think, oh yeah, it's just addictive because it's just the nature of social media. Yes, I mean, social media, if you think about it, the way that the apps are laid out, the way that everything is on the screen, the colors, the sounds, everything, you could say, yes, even to that level is even intentional to keep you hooked on a specific app. So this is why it's so important to be mindful with your technology uses. Only use it for what you actually need it. If you have a business, I totally get it, why you have like social media channel. If you don't have a business, why in fact do you have a social media channel? I totally get why you do, because you want to, you know, educate and empower yourself. But there are some people who just want to scroll after work and they just want to be in this mindless state. But, you know, just save your time. You read the book, do something useful, find your life purpose. I think we covered a lot of good stuff today, Jack. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
No worries. And I'll just quickly add, so just because you did ask about fat, and why we're fat. But again, it's just like, I did a post on this today on Instagram for those who want to look into it, but it's the exact same thing.
Awesome.
It's protective.
Timely.
It's protecting you from combustion. Yeah, exactly. Combusting oxygen, protons, and electrons, essentially. So you're protecting yourself from using fuel. And yeah, I think like one quote that I love hearing, because you did mention like owning stuff, and like how, I can't remember what you said exactly, but like owning stuff can control you or something like that. But yeah, like the movie Fight Club, Tyler Durden, which is like Brad Pitt, always, he says something that always aligned with me, is like, the things you start owning, the things you own start owning you. And I think what's important around that is just like to take a step back, minimalize or simplify your life, and then just understand that like you don't own anything in nature. You just become a part of it when you plug into it. And I think that's the most important part. And I think that's why it's so healing. So yeah. And you're welcome. It was a really good conversation as well.
Oh, yeah, it was great. We dropped so many truth bombs. It was awesome. And when you look at nature, there is no scarcity. You know, there is such a massive illusion of scarcity in this modern world. Lack of water, lack of fresh air, lack of oil, lack of this, lack of that. There's no lack in nature. You go out in nature, it's just all an illusion, you know? When you look at the reality of things and you actually live in the real world like we talked about, and you're not living in your digital reality, then you actually notice that, oh, like all of the things that they're telling me is like a lie, you know, and they are the ones who are actually engineering the weather. It's not, there's no actual like climate change. They are changing the fucking climate. You know what I mean? Where can people find you, Jack, and connect with you and work with you?
So my Instagram's Jack Schroder _ that's my main place where I post, but I also post a lot on X, which is Jack _ Schroder _ and that will have a bit more in-depth stuff, but less graphics, obviously. And then my website is jackschroder.com. So I work one-to-one with health coaching clients, and I also do mentoring as well. So the health coaching, it's like, it's a mixture of people, but generally it's prioritized at men, but I seem to be having like 50-50 with women as well. And at the moment, it seems to be like a mixture of like, again, everything we spoke about. So like, you know, gut issues, hormone imbalances, chronic illness, autoimmune conditions, all these things that are pretty complex and maybe even layered. So I work generally with clients like that at the moment. And again, maybe it's also a client who just wants to like optimize and get like a bunch of blood work and lab work and dial it all in. I do a bit of that as well, which is also a bit of fun. And yeah, with the mentoring, so again, like that's just like, for those who are interested in either coaching or want to learn, or they're already coaching, they got clients, but they kind of need a bit of support and guidance in the right direction. I help them with like clients, like cases, their protocols, blood work, all that kind of stuff. But then on top of that, do like the business side of things, the learning side of things, how to optimize all that essentially, so you can get your business up and running. So again,
that's amazing.
that's for people who are like passionate about that. And then, yeah, on top of that, like obviously like they're like the higher ticket options that, you know, cost a bit more of an investment because it's, you know, more in depth. But I also have like a lower ticket option, which is just my school community. And that contains like a ridiculous amount of information. Like there's like 60 protocols, 100 plus blogs, 60 plus webinars, health journals and learning journals. So like I respond every 24 hours and guide you in the right path, point you in the right direction in terms of what resources you should use. And then it's got like live Q&As as well every fortnight. So you can jump on a call or just ask questions and pick my brain. So yeah,
that's amazing.
That's everything, I think. And I've got a Substack as well. I can't remember what it is. I think it's just Jack Schroder, but that has some protocols on there as well.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Jack, for coming on. I would absolutely love to do it again in the future. You're such a wealth of knowledge. And, you know, as I read your Instagram posts, I always think like, damn, like we need to talk about this in the podcast. I write it down and, you know, I'm sure there's so much stuff that we didn't talk about today. We didn't even dive like so deep into gut health. So we definitely need to do another one in the future.
Would love to, bro. That's one of my other favorite topics. I would say like the two other ones is like blood work and gut health.
Nice.
If you guys enjoy the topics and guests I bring on the show, I would really appreciate it if you left me a 5-star review on Spotify and also subscribe to Fitness Wisdom Podcast on YouTube as well, as this helps to spread the knowledge and wisdom with the world. Until next time, this is the Fitness Wisdom Podcast.